Welcome to Arc Rambles with mildly amused Milksnake, where I overshare my thoughts on randomly chosen topics over our gameplay in the background to justify spending hours in game while being unproductive. And today's topic is arguments. Like and subscribe if you enjoy hearing me rambling. To the point though. Lately I had a semantic-based discussion about what an argument is, as we do whenever my non-natively English-speaking brain thinks the context some word is used in is weird. Now, what I would consider as an argument is either as an object being a reasoning given for an idea or an action that is argued for, or an exchange of opinions that became aggressive. My husband decided to correct it for me, as technically it can be defined as a synonym of discussion, even if not aggressive or angry in tone. I still don't know if I buy that. Even Google claims that while it's an exchange of diverging views, typically it's heated or angry one. But overall, the definition isn't that important, as long as we understand what we're trying to tell each other at least. So, well, whatever. That being said, where that discussion came from is pondering if we did in fact argue. Sure, we've had some more or less heated debates, but more theatrically heated, and mostly about inconsequential nerdy stuff. At least, I didn't experience much of negative emotion to speak of during them. You know, like, is there any way for a dragon in your physics-accurate magic system to not look like Minecraft creative mode flying when flying? Like, why would they not levitate to themselves? Why even have wings? That was funny. Sometimes though we've had more consequential exchanges of opinion, but I guess I also considered it just discussions. After all, none of those involved shouting or hurt feelings. Though that may be because I'm naturally a calm person, and my anger is usually only reactive to someone else's rage. I didn't really perceive it as stressful. My husband's logical way of putting things without shouting or using ad personam arguments makes it look to me like he's never quite emotional too. Even though he himself describes himself as a very passionate person, he just doesn't let the emotions control him. Perhaps his emotional heat just pales even more in comparison of my very emotionally expressive family. Some of them could have been triggered into open rage even by an object laying not where they wanted to be, and expressed it in full volume. Well, it wasn't fun, but it certainly must have dulled my senses to what can be considered anger. So if someone not screaming at the kitchenware, they're calm to me. Perhaps then from his point of view we sometimes did argue very mildly. That makes me wonder, however, why do some people argue so aggressively? My best guess, part of it is natural aptitude. For example, I'm just as expressive with my emotions as most of my family. I cannot keep a calm face if I'm actually experiencing some kind of emotion. I tear up easily or can shoot involuntary death glares if I'm annoyed. But I seem to have acquired emotional arousal patterns of my father's, and that is not much to speak of. Which gives many people illusion that I'm actually very emotionally controlled person, while in fact, if my expression is neutral, that usually means so are my feelings at the moment. If it looks like a void, smells like a void, it's probably a void. Perhaps it's just that some personalities are higher on neuroticism trait than mine, and that might cause them to just experience more emotions in general and more strongly, as neuroticism is the measure of instinctual fear or concern response, and where there is concern about something being wrong, anger often appears to counter it. But even more of it is likely just sheer proficiency in communication. And while I still consider myself a good communicator, my hobby is definitely more polished under that aspect. For me, getting the basics of it was just easier due to my emotional profile. And while having it easy is nice and good, it does stunt your progress when you feel like it comes to you naturally and you don't have to polish it that much. Back on the topic of anger though, because that's what transforms the discussion into an argument. It's important to remember that there are uses for anger. It can be an effective tool in certain situations, like intimidation checks against people who want to hurt you. I noticed, however, it tends to be counterproductive when trying to reach an understanding or agreement between friends or family, or even neutral strangers, if you don't want to turn them into hostiles and break the relationships you've got. Like I mentioned, I'm not an easily angered person, but when someone goes at me with over-exaggerated rage that I genuinely don't know how to interact with beyond the fight or flight response, even I get defensive, and whatever the person is trying to communicate through that falls on deaf ears, misinterpreted as just a display of pure hostility. And from observations on my real life and online acquaintances, it is the same for everyone. Once someone comes at them with grudge and anger, any hopes for a productive discussion or convincing them of something is lost, at least until everyone chills out and apologizes. The only thing that varies between people is how intense display of anger is required to pass the threshold of discussion shutdown. Emotional control seems to be crucial for resolving a discussion without inflicting damage to your relationships, and even hoping to get your point across, to be honest. Unless you're a robot like me and just vibe through the discussion until someone yells at you. Just kidding though, I'm not a robot, otherwise I wouldn't stutter so much. Okay, back on track. First reason why is that important is controlling your anger or defensiveness can give you opportunity for reconsidering assumptions that can cause misunderstandings. I've heard a lot of stories of people going off the rails over something seemingly nonsensical, like someone being too generous for them. Now, I personally think free stuff is just free stuff. If there's no written contract to it, putting me in debt, ain't nothing can be gotten out of me outside of the range of my will and gratitude. But think how many people immediately assume someone being generous to them is trying to put them in their debt, or pities or patronizes them, and start acting hostile towards that person. Perhaps it's because their family was always like that, never letting them forget any small favor a family member did to them, and using it as a manipulation strategy to get further favors out of him. If that's the first or only reason they see for which someone could ever be generous to them, their reaction seems more understandable automatically. Regardless of that though, it can still be very overwhelming for the person who's being generous. They might end up feel mistreated or defensive, which can put a rift in the relationship those people previously had. But it doesn't have to go that way. Imagine you are the person who assumes negative intent in the other. If you have control over your emotional expression, you can perhaps hold in your instinctual anger response and attempt to acquire some more information. Like asking, is this genuinely out of your goodwill? You won't demand anything from me in return? Without an angry tinge to your voice, of course. And perhaps that will be enough to acquire reassurance that will in turn calm your anger. You can even explain to the person why you feel like that could be the case. Now, I'm not a professional psychologist, and I know some people discourage over-explaining your reasoning, but in my own experience, when it's done in actual human relationship context and not when you're a target of government investigation, it seems to do more good than harm. Like, why not? Why leave another person, especially one you might care about, not aware of why you think or feel the way you do? Why leave information gaps that allow them to assume negative things about you after a negative interaction? Sure, don't over-explain yourself if you've committed a crime or a social transgression for no valid reason and you're panicking. Don't BS people, but if you do have a valid reason, do tell if you think that would humanize you in another person's eyes. Then again, our own reactions aren't always the reason discussions go south. What if you were the person who wanted to make someone happy with generosity, but it turned out they got snappy at you in return, for reasons you're oblivious to? Again, often if we go with our instincts on this one, we'd feel the temptation to get angry back at them, call them ungrateful, and in general decrease our opinion of them as a person. But what if you instead reined in that anger and asked the other person calmly, what makes you so angry about it? Or did I do something wrong? Don't be afraid to explain your own motivations either. In that way, you can de-escalate a conflict that could erode your relationship and perhaps make it even deeper by getting to know a person more. Long story short though, it is, in my opinion, very beneficial to control your initial emotional responses to stimuli in a debate and to try to extract all the information you can before making a judgment on another person's behavior or opinions or responses. Also remember that your discussion partner, be it your friend, parent, acquaintance, a loved one, or a random stranger, is still human. View them as such, not as a monster for doing or saying things that instinctually rubbed you the wrong way. They for sure have their reasons. Now, those might not be good reasons. I'm not saying everything is justifiable just for the virtue of being understandable. But to make your call, you must first understand them and only try to debate them from that point. And most importantly, self-reflect. Think of why things rub you the wrong way the way they do. Sometimes our negative reactions have a blatant reason, like we perceive certain behavior or opinion as a genuinely harmful one, or at the very least threatening. But sometimes it's more of an assumption we're making about another person's motives or meaning of their behavior. And some other times it's just a pet peeve that maybe aggravates us because it's too weird or tied to some Pavlovian conditioning that got accidentally or intentionally inflicted on you in your past. Self-reflection is the key for being able to communicate smoothly with people of different manners and opinions. Then again, a debate is only one kind of argument that can occur, and arguably the easiest to resolve with no hard feelings left afterwards, since in debates, hard feelings appear mainly due to miscommunications, bad manners, and instinctive heightened emotional reactions towards people's behaviors and ideas. That's the facing off with the differences class of arguments. In those, even if you don't convince another person to adopt your own opinions and proper behaviors, you might still come to a conclusion that it's not worth getting angry about, and you can agree to disagree in most cases without hating each other's guts. But there's whole another class of arguments that are much more challenging to tackle without getting all hot-headed and eroding your relationships. And those are expectation-based arguments, or facing off with the demands. Now, in all honesty, that one I still don't have exactly figured out, because then the person who makes the demand is, in my perception, really the only one with the deciding power to prevent relationship damage from occurring, at least if there's a conflict based on you not wanting to comply with the demand. There are also some people who will masquerade demands as actual requests, but then get mad at you and not leave you alone until you comply if you deny the request, which is not a request in nature. Now, if you're being demanded or expected something from, and you really do not want to comply, you can influence the outcome of such arguments by controlling your own reactions and getting information, like in previous argument class, at least information about opposite sides' reasoning behind their demands. You can give your own calm and sensible arguments that will signal to them that you're mature and you know what you want to do. You might even try tapping into a finite pile of valid excuses of why you claim you don't think you'll be able to comply. But in the end, all of these are just nudges, additional information for the person who makes the demand to either accept and let you free from their expectation in the moment, or to nitpick it to use it for their own arguments of why you should actually comply. How much negative reaction and relationship damage will be caused by your lack of compliance is not exclusively, but it is finally dependent on your demander's own emotional control, self-reflection, and communication skills. And of course, how badly they want their demand fulfilled. That and whether or not your refusal will cause some genuine issues or discomforts to the person making the demand. Because if you're a stubborn butthole that doesn't comply with any reasonable requests, and by that you're making coexistence with you hell for them, or making them feel like they would be better off without you, or even alone, then of course your relationship is gonna break. After all, you're doing everything you can to make it not bearable for another person. It's not like demands are always selfish, they're just a part of human coexistence. And sometimes they're just result of feeling neglected or feeling like you're in trouble and need help. And that's why, again, getting as much information as you can before making final decision on whether you're going to comply or not is crucial for keeping this sort of argument civil. Self-reflect on why is it that you don't want to comply with their demand. Are they asking for something unreasonable that crosses your boundaries, exposes you to exhaustion, health or bodily integrity hazards, crosses legal boundaries, etc.? Or maybe you have something else to do and you just don't want to prioritize spending time on fulfilling their demand over whatever activities and projects you have already planned for yourself. Or it could even be that you think they're the one abusing your generosity and time. Perhaps this is one request or demand too many. Perhaps you think they should just do whatever they demand by themselves if they care so much about having it done, because you have no common values with them on the matter and the demand is inconveniencing you for no apparent benefit. I've faced a lot of demands to which I felt aversion to for each of those listed reasons at one time or another. Not all of them ended in arguments, some did though, no matter how diplomatic I tried to be. Sometimes it's just like that. Person wants you to do stuff and you don't want to do the stuff, and they're very offended by that. And perhaps sometimes I was wrong for refusing. Maybe I was lazy. With more context, I could have deduced that at times the inconvenience to myself that fulfilling a certain demand presented caused even more inconvenience to the person demanding it when it's not fulfilled. Think about it. Sometimes you're young and healthy, and then someone you don't feel very strongly about helping demands you assist them with something they have to accomplish as part of their own duties. But that is too difficult for them at the moment due to their age or health. Most of us would agree that it is moral in that situation to comply with that, regardless if it causes discomfort or inconvenience for you, because failure to do so, if it's in your might to do so, would result in more serious harm to them than it is doing to you. The only situation where it would really be justifiable to not help such person on the basis of this is not my responsibility is if they consistently keep piling up work they cannot physically accomplish without injuring themselves, that they weren't exactly forced to take on, and then expect you to help them every time, or even majority of the time. That could be considered to be abuse of your time and kindness, and you don't want to be the person who others dump consequences of their bad decisions onto. But there is some less black and white situations out there. What if their distress over refusal is real, but not rational, at least not from your frame of reference? One stereotypical situation like that is that as a teenager or young adult, you'd want to get a tattoo, and your parents are demanding that you don't, because their own belief system tells them that it's a bad idea for you. They're probably coming from a place of care, where they either don't want you to stray from their culture, as they believe it would have negative consequences for your well-being in the future, or perhaps they're coming from a place of fear, where they live in a community that disapproves of tattoos as a principle, and they're concerned that they'll be gossiped about or excluded. Now, in that situation, if you personally see nothing wrong with tattoos, of course you'd think they're making an unreasonable demand, and what do you do if your body is your concern and only yours? If you'll regret it, then be it so, that'll be your responsibility, not theirs. And if they fear being ostracized over an individual choice of yours, that community must clearly be toxic and they should leave. But is your desire for a tattoo as a mean of decoration or self-expression really a serious enough business to make it a hill you're willing to die on for your family and your family's community? Will it cause you psychological distress to not get it until you're moved out from your parents and your decision isn't directly influencing them to the same degree as when you're still under their care? That, and is there absolutely no value to the system of beliefs your parents hold? Or is it just that one part that restricts what you in particular want to do, but it also has some benefits to your family or their psychological well-being? Every belief system, after all, does have some benefits to the people who practice it, otherwise no one would adopt that lifestyle. Most of the time, culture and belief systems are just a series of trade-offs. In the end, it's up to you to judge. Those would be important questions to ask yourself in that judgment process. For me personally, if I was in that situation, it wouldn't be a really big deal for me, as I'm not big on expressing myself through fashion or tattoos. I thought it would be cool to have at some points of my life, but I never felt very strongly about it. Perhaps for you though, that or another thing would have been very important, and you felt like while it's just a decoration on the surface, you being denied it is just a symptom of a larger value conflict that has been consistently making your life miserable. In any way, gather information and evaluate every demand carefully. Think of why the other person wants it and why they need it or don't need it, and what harm would it be to you to comply. In the end, still, sometimes some things will be the hills you're willing to die on, and you'll have to set your boundaries accordingly. But if you weigh all the pros and cons before deciding which hill is that, at least there's a higher chance that you're not going to be the one who's the butthole in the argument that ensues over those boundaries. Remember, while demands are natural element of the society, for we are not a bunch of solitary animals that can each do their own thing without complying with wider society, lest the society collapses at least. Being dragged through life by people who are overly demanding and want to control overwhelming part of your time or too many aspects of your life can be miserable. So heated arguments or just silent damage over time to your relationships with them can be inevitable for gaining personal independence and your own agenda, where someone else really doesn't want to allow you to have it. But if that is so, then is that relationship loss really a loss? That being said, ruining a relationship is something you should not be executing impulsively, because unfairly broken relationships can cause a whole mess of regret later in life. Remember to not focus on the 10% bad, but rather try to notice the 90% that's good. And man, did I stray from the initial topic. Lastly though, I'll just point out some types of arguments I think that are not worth having at all. Like trying to get someone to admit fault or blame or responsibility for something that's in the past or frankly not your issue to solve. I see some people do that. They'll get into arguments over how someone should have done something differently in the past. Sometimes the target will just start justifying itself on how things going wrong with how he did it isn't his fault. And it's all a nothing burger. Mature person wouldn't start that discussion. Or if someone else starts it, dismiss it as things that happened in the past are impossible to fix. Only their consequences in the present are. I know sometimes people doing this just want to make sure that the lesson sinks in for the future, but it's really dumb for following reasons. One, people analyze their own mistakes better in their own head. When they're accused of making them, you're just activating their instinct to defend themselves and insult their intelligence by insinuating that they cannot self-reflect on their own. Two, if the other person is really too dumb to already know what their mistake was after things went wrong, again, activating their ego's self-defense systems is not going to help them. At that point, you're just wasting both of yours mental energy and bringing down the mood by picking that discussion up. Another of the arguments of this type is the one that results from trying to convince people to alter their core values or change them to yours, especially if objectivity of both beliefs is technically improvable. Sometimes it's really better to just mutually explain why you both believe what you do and leave each other in peace, so each of you can evaluate the system of values on their own terms without being pressured to accept or reject it. Treat it as a fascinating exercise in philosophy. And remember, people don't like to be wrong. They will defend their ideas with reason or without it if necessary. And having your core beliefs shattered is not pleasant, and most of the time not even beneficial to a person. Again, you're wasting both of your mental energy if you start this, and you'd be surprised just how many things can be qualified as technically not provable. Even scientific research or video evidence is not a 100% reliable proof these days, with how research is sometimes biased or conducted with poor methodology, and both photos and video footage can be altered in a way that's impossible for naked eye to recognize. Someone can be quite intelligent and still hold beliefs that put conclusions, quote-unquote, proved by these things under serious doubt. If someone doesn't believe your source of information is valid and don't have means or mental faculties to confirm whether it is truly valid or not through their own experience, trying to make them accept it as truth and fact is really futile. People only ever accept facts unquestioningly if it's the very first version of the quote-unquote fact that they learn. It is really funny how our brains work. We'll go out of our way to defend the first belief we acquired, and will often run whatever evidence there is to contradict it through insane scrutiny. In any way, when you're discussing your beliefs and you want someone to consider them, you shouldn't approach it aggressively. Because if you present the facts you believe in as an interesting trivia to them, without being emotionally charged about it, even if they initially dismiss it, they may at the very least think about it instead of getting defensive because you don't want to accept their worldview. Really, it's quite simple. Just don't be a jerk, and try to not get offended by jerks, since it's a waste of breath. And for today, I don't have much more to say on types of arguments, but I hope this ramble inspires you all to be more chill and understanding people, even to those who aren't understanding towards you. Feel free to comment if there's any conflict you struggle to resolve in your life, or comment how you resolve some conflict in an extremely smooth way that you're proud of. And if you think my take reasonable, like and subscribe to hear more of these. See you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye!